Hello everyone and welcome to Wild Old Times, a podcast about the weird, obscure and forgotten parts of Irish history. My name is Ciaran Conliffe, and on this episode I'll be talking to you about Nazi spies. One dark night in May of 1940, a parachute drifted down towards a field in County Meath. Unseen by anyone, it carried a man dressed in the full uniform of the Luftwaffe, Germany's Air Force. His name was Hermann Goertz, and the reason he was wearing his uniform was so that he wouldn't be shot as a spy if he was spotted. But he was a spy, and he had a secret mission, to link up with the IRA and enlist their help in Germany's war on Britain. Goertz had been 24 when the First World War broke out, and he enlisted in the German army immediately. He was posted to the Eastern Front, where he was wounded in Christmas of 1914. Once he recovered, he joined the German Air Force, the Luftstreitkräfte, and after training as a pilot, he became a reconnaissance officer. This made him part of the intelligence service, and when he showed a talent for interrogating captives, he was moved from the planes to a groundside post. This probably saved his life, since the mortality rate for pilots was quite high. In later life, he was terrified of being captured by the Russians, and this might have been because of the guilt he felt for torturing their soldiers who were captured. By the end of the war, he was a captain. The Treaty of Versailles disbanded the German Air Force, turning Goertz into a civilian. He settled down and married Ellen Aschenborn, daughter of a retired German admiral. Her father had commanded Germany's motorboat forces during the war. Goertz went back to university and earned a doctorate in international law. This led him into academia, which caused him to travel abroad frequently. In 1927 he visited Ireland and was enchanted by the beauty of the Irish countryside. This visit might have been prompted by an academic interest in the treaties and legal relationships forming between Britain and the new Irish Free State. At conferences in America, Goertz was known to discuss these matters with members of Clan na Gael, the American society that had acted as a major fundraiser to the IRA during the struggle for independence. They, of course, were strongly on the anti-treaty side during the Irish Civil War, and Goertz doubtless had some sympathy. Like many Germans of the time, he also regarded the treaty that had ended his country's war as a betrayal. In time, these feelings festered like poison in the country's heart until it burst forth in the form of the Nazi Party. In 1935, they called up all their reserve soldiers, and Captain Goertz returned to the intelligence service. In August 1935, he arrived in Suffolk, England. With him was Marion Emig, a 19-year-old woman who was posing as his niece and secretary. This was a genius bit of cover, since anyone who thought Goertz was hiding anything would probably assume he was actually on a holiday with his mistress. They spent a few weeks in Suffolk before moving on to Broadstairs, where there was a large Air Force base. There they became a bit of a local curiosity, because they had a motorbike. Marion used the motorbike to grab the attention of an English airman named Kenneth Lewis. She invited him along to tea, where she and Goertz pretended to be amateur aviation enthusiasts. Marion asked Kenneth to get her pictures of aircraft and aerial photographs as gifts. He was a bit uncertain of this, but Marion assured him, "You must remember, in the next war, England and Germany will be on the same side." The pair of spies managed to get the information they wanted, and it looked like a successful operation, but Goertz made a mistake as they left Broadstairs. He left a note for his landlady, saying he would be back to pick up his things from the house, and asking her to take care of his bicycle combinations. By this he meant the overalls he wore on the motorbike, but she assumed he meant the actual vehicle. When she found it gone, because he'd taken it with him, she thought it had been stolen and called the police. They found no evidence of a burglary, but they did find some of Goertz's sketches of the Air Force base in the pocket of the overalls. When he returned to Britain a few weeks later, the police were waiting at the airport, and he was arrested. Goertz's arrest was front-page news, as a German spy in England could cause a major international incident. The German government, of course, disavowed all knowledge of him. Goertz pleaded innocence at his trial, claiming to have been in England gathering material for a book about the British Air Force. Whether because of lack of evidence, or because pressure was put on them not to cause problems, the court decided that there was no evidence that he was a spy for the German government. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison for trespassing and stealing state secrets. Goertz was lucky enough to be released in February 1939, before Britain declared war on Germany. When he got home, he was promoted to major, showing that his mission to England had been official after all. And he had a new scheme to propose to his masters. While in prison, he had made friends who had links to the Irish Republican Army. The IRA had been outlawed in 1936 by Eamon de Valera, but a strong anti-treaty and anti-British feeling still ran deep in a lot of Irish people. One of the leaders of this remnant, Stephen Hayes, had sent a plan, known as Plan Kathleen, to the Nazi leadership. It proposed landing German troops near Derry and having them, along with IRA troops in Leitrim, sweep east across Ulster and conquer it. Somehow this would then trigger a coup in Dublin and allow them to install a new government loyal to the Axis. It was a profoundly stupid plan on multiple counts, but the Nazis decided that it could be a good diversion for their own plans to invade Ireland during their attack on Britain. The success of the IRA in attacking the magazine fort in Phoenix Park the previous Christmas also impressed the Nazis, though they should have noticed that the Irish police quickly recovered most of the stolen weapons and arrested the men responsible. Instead, they authorised Goertz to travel to Ireland in May 1940 in what they called Operation Mainaw. Goertz later said that he didn't mean to land in Meath, but that he meant to land in Northern Ireland in County Tyrone. This was probably a lie, though, part of the pretense that he hadn't intended to invade a neutral country. His mission was almost over before it began, when he wasn't able to find the radio set that was meant to come down in a second parachute. Without it, he couldn't radio his contact to meet up and get a change of clothes, so he had to walk 80 miles in his Nazi uniform to the nearest safe house. He did his best to disguise his clothes, and seems to have done a good enough job. In fact, he even stopped at a Garda station and asked for directions. Eventually he arrived at the home of the poet Iseult Stewart. She was the daughter of the legendary Irish rebel Maud Gonne, and in her youth had gone to prison alongside her mother for protesting against the government. However, she was now a mother of 2 in her late 40s, and her husband had left her to move to Germany 6 months earlier. So she was not happy to have a tall, scar-faced German turning up on her doorstep. Still, she took him in off the street and let him call his IRA contact. That was the man who had brought Plan Kathleen to the Germans, Seamus O'Donovan. O'Donovan was a committed IRA member who had been over in England carrying out bombings the year before, though the heightened wartime security had driven him back to Ireland. He took Goertz down to Dublin, where he could disappear in the metropolis. On the 21st of May, Goertz met with Stephen Hayes. He had brought a great deal of American currency with him, between $20,000 and $175,000 by different accounts, and most of this he handed over. This impressed his hosts, but it was not mutual. Goertz thought their movement was riven by infighting and hopelessly insecure. He was proven right just 2 days later when the house they met in was raided by the Gardaí. They found Goertz's uniform and insignia, along with the details of Plan Kathleen. Here was indisputable proof that the IRA were in collusion with Nazi Germany. There were 2 direct consequences of the raid. The first was that it immediately strengthened ties between British and Irish intelligence. Within days, the British spy Dudley Clarke travelled to Dublin to begin discussions on Plan W, a secret treaty that would allow British troops into Ireland to defend it in the case of a Nazi invasion. In the meantime, the German government got an angry phone call from their ambassador, Edward Hempel. He had no idea Goertz was in the country, and he was the one who was left to pick up pieces with the Irish government. The second was that Goertz lost all confidence in the IRA. Although he had to go on the run, he refused to have anything else to do with them during his time in Ireland. His other big problem with the Irish rebels was that he felt they lacked ambition and refused to think in big terms. Quote, "A hired taxi, 4 men in it with 7 rounds and a non-functioning machine gun, that is the way they think they can fight England. That is very sad, but outside a national movement is growing everywhere. It could so easily become a flame, but they are as timid as the masses in their imagination." End quote. In fact, he even abandoned one safe house when he found out it had been previously used by the IRA. His main support network seems to have been a succession of old ladies, veterans of Cumann the Man who hadn't forgotten their old loyalties. Although he wouldn't meet with the IRA, he did meet with people who were sympathetic to the German cause. This is rumoured to have included Owen O'Duffy, former Garda Commissioner and the founder of the Blue Shirts. O'Duffy had resigned as Commissioner after failing to mount a coup when Fianna Fáil won the general election of 1933. He had gone on to lead a brigade for the fascists in Spain. Goertz also made contact with Ambassador Hempel, who was delighted to find out that Goertz wanted to get out of Ireland. Hempel tried to get him on a boat to Spain, but bad weather foiled the attempt. What Hempel didn't know was that G2, the Irish intelligence service at the time, were reading all his secret messages. The legendary Irish codebreaker Richard Hayes had cracked all his ciphers, and so the Irish could even write fake replies to make him think his messages were getting through. There's one story that a bored G2 agent sent a fake message telling Goertz he had been given a promotion. Goertz was not the only German spy in Ireland, though he was the highest ranked. 11 others were arrested over the course of the war. Ernst Weber Droll landed in Ireland months before Goertz in February. He wasn't an intelligence veteran, but he did know Ireland. He had toured it with a circus before the war, under the name of Atlas the Strong. His strongman days were behind him, though. By the time the war broke out, he was 60 years old and suffering from arthritis. Ernst was landed on the west coast of Ireland, near Clare in County Mayo, in February 1940, by a German U-boat. His job was to deliver money and a radio to the IRA, but his dinghy capsized on the way to the shore from the submarine, and the radio was lost. Ernst was arrested in March, though since he hadn't done any actual spying, he could only be charged with illegally entering Ireland. It wasn't until 1942 that he was interned under the Emergency Powers Act. 2 other spies came to Ireland by boat in 1940. Walter Simon landed at Dingle in Kerry in June and was spotted burying his radio. He bought a ticket for the bus to Tralee, then decided to visit a local pub while he waited. 3 whiskies later he went to get the bus, but by now the Gardaí were on the search for the man seen coming ashore. The drunk Simon was spotted at Tralee boarding the train to Dublin, and 2 detectives got on after him. When they arrived, he was arrested. He gave a fake name but was identified by his fingerprints. Although there was no computer database, different countries shared their records, and he had been arrested in England 2 years earlier. The other boat spy was a bit more successful. He was Wilhelm Preetz, and he had a big advantage. He was legally allowed to be in Ireland. His wife Sarah Reynolds came from Tuam in County Galway, and had been to visit her family before. When the war started, he was in England and fled to Ireland. Since the Reynolds family lied and said he'd arrived before the war started, he was allowed to stay. He abused this trust by secretly travelling to Germany in December 1939 and becoming a secret agent. After 6 months of training, he was sent back in June of 1940, landing in Kerry around the same time as Walter Simon. Willie made it to Dublin without being caught, where he moved into a flat near Trinity University. His job was to send weather reports back to Germany, which were important for planning bombing raids on England and Wales. The Irish authorities picked up these radio transmissions and were able to track him down. His drunken antics made him well known enough to be easy to find. He was arrested in August 1940. During his 2 months as a spy, his biggest accomplishment was managing to get his wife's 19-year-old sister pregnant. Also in the summer of 1940, a group of German special forces landed on the coast of Cork. Herbert Tributh and Dieter Gartner were saboteurs armed with explosives. Their guide, Henry Obed, was an Indian man who had worked as a wildlife importer before the war. Ireland was just a stop on their way to their planned destination in England. They were to sabotage the infrastructure there in support of an invasion. The flaw in their plan was that while an Indian man wouldn't have stood out too much in England, he was very unusual in Ireland at the time. They were stopped and questioned when they got off their bus at Cork, and when their answers weren't satisfactory, their bags were searched. When the explosives were found, they were arrested. It had been less than a day since they arrived in Ireland. On the 12th of March 1941, another German spy parachuted into Ireland. His name was Gunther Schütz, and his mission was to survey the British military installations in Northern Ireland. Perhaps learning from what happened to Goertz, he was forbidden from trying to contact the IRA. Didn't really matter, though. He was dropped near the town of Tymon in County Wexford, 100 miles away from his planned drop zone. When the Gardaí spotted him leaving a field with a large suitcase, they stopped and questioned him. Schütz told them that his car had broken down travelling from Naas to Dublin, which would have been believable if he'd landed where he was supposed to. Gunther's instructions were microdots hidden in newspaper clippings, tiny text only readable with a microscope. It was a bit of a giveaway that he had the microscope in his suitcase. Among those instructions was the name of Werner Unland. Unland was a German married to an English woman who moved to Dublin before the war. For the previous 2 years he'd been sending regular letters to German intelligence via dead drops, disguised as reports on a soap manufacturing business. Part of the reason he evaded capture for so long was that he was making these reports up. He wrote about meetings with Republican dissidents that never happened, and was entirely scamming the German military for his monthly paycheck. Not all the spies in Ireland were Germans. One was a Dutchman, a navy officer named Jan van Loon, who had escaped Holland on board his ship. He was a member of the Dutch Nazi Party and wanted to get back to Holland to fight for the Germans. He was arrested when he tried to set up a secret meeting with the German embassy. And 3 were Irishmen, all of whom had been working in Jersey when it was captured by the Germans. One of them, John Francis O'Reilly, spoke German and acted as a translator for the conquerors. After helping recruit Irish labourers for the German steel industry and working for the Irish language section of the radio propaganda unit, he volunteered to be parachuted into Ireland in December 1943. O'Reilly landed near his family in County Clare and was arrested at his father's house 2 days after landing. John Kenny, who parachuted in the next day, did even worse. Wind gusts threw him into a stone wall as he landed, and he was badly injured. He had to stumble to a nearby farmhouse for help and was arrested immediately. Both were probably less of an embarrassment to the Germans than Joseph Lenihan. He landed in Meath in 1941, went out drinking with his family in Dublin, spending the money the Germans had given him, and then headed up to Northern Ireland to surrender to the RUC. He nearly became a double agent, but instead spent the war as a free man under police observation. Eventually, in November 1941, Goertz was captured. He'd been right to be worried about the IRA. He was caught when the police trailed a known member to his hiding place in Clontarf. Goertz was interned without trial and went on hunger strike in protest. He stopped after 3 weeks, when his fellow prisoners convinced him that nothing would please the government more than if he died and stopped being an embarrassment. Which he was. A week after he had been arrested, America had entered the war. Eamon de Valera was under a lot of pressure from his old homeland to abandon Ireland's neutrality and join the Allies. The fact that a senior Nazi spy had been caught in Ireland was a weapon in the hands of those pushing that agenda. But the fact that he'd clearly been supported by the population was a reason for Dev to play things carefully. In the end, Ireland remained neutral for the rest of the war. The German spies remained imprisoned at costume barracks in Athlone. This wasn't as bad as an actual prison. The rooms were carpeted, and there was a common room and garden for the prisoners. Eventually, Goertz resigned himself to his fate, and passed the next few years by writing 2 plays. He also translated the works of W.B. Yeats into German. Goertz considered escaping a few times, but his plans never came to anything. The one spy who did manage to escape was Günther Schütz. He was being held at Mountjoy in 1942, when he managed to get out of a window with a rope made from curtains. Jan van Loon escaped along with him, but was injured and didn't make it out of the prison. Schütz managed to contact the IRA and went on the run for 6 weeks. They arranged for a boat to take him to France, but he was recaptured when their safe house was raided. After that, he was sent to Athlone with the other internees. At the end of the war, most of the prisoners from costume barracks were repatriated back to Germany. Some of them had grown fond of Ireland. In a letter from the camp, Goertz wrote, quote, "I often curse fate that I find friends here, friends who showed me the genius of the country. I fell in love with Ireland. The more upright a lover is, the more he suffers if his love is unrequited." End quote. Günther Schütz also liked Ireland, enough that he moved back in 1947 and lived there until his death in 1990. Not all of them wanted to stay in Ireland out of fondness. Jan van Loon faced a death sentence for desertion in Holland and was allowed to stay permanently. And Goertz was terrified of being handed over to the Russian authorities. He cut a deal with Eamon de Butler, second in command at G2. He would not be immediately deported if he gave them information about his time on the run. An official amnesty for all German spies in Ireland from the Irish Justice Minister in 1946 let him relax, and he became the secretary of the Save the German Children Society. This was a charity which eventually took in 500 German war orphans. The orphans were housed in the old military barracks at Glencree in County Wicklow, which had previously been used to hold German airmen who had crash-landed in Ireland during the war. International pressure forced Ireland to repeal the amnesty, and on the 12th of April 1947, Goertz and 6 other German refugees were arrested. Most were deported immediately, but Goertz was given some time to allow him to put his Irish affairs in order. During this period, he was offered a deal by Ambassador Hempel, that came from the Americans. They offered him asylum if he agreed to work for them. While he was considering it, he went to Dublin Castle on the 23rd of May for an appointment to extend his parole. He was shocked to be told that he would be deported to Germany that afternoon. Goertz reportedly stared disbelievingly at the detective officers. Then he quickly pulled a glass vial out of his pocket and crushed it between his teeth. The vial contained cyanide, and he died instantly. Goertz's funeral got a lot of coverage in the media. Two of the people carrying his coffin were the TD Dan Breen, who had been noticeably pro-German during the war, and Charles McGuinness, an ex-IRA member who had fought against the fascists in Spain. Many of the newspapers commented on the large number of women who attended the funeral, some with swastika armbands. There were also many wreaths from the old women who had sheltered him. Originally he was buried in a graveyard in Dublin, but in 1974 his remains were exhumed and moved to the German military cemetery in Glencree, on the grounds of the same building where he had brought the German war orphans. That was the story of Hermann Goertz, the German spy who landed in Ireland in 1940 and never left again. Thank you for listening to Wild Old Times, a fortnightly podcast about Irish history. Our logo is by Liffey Designs. Check them out at liffeydesigns.co.uk. The opening theme is The Cat That Ate the Candle. The closing theme is The Parting Glass. Both were recorded by Gregory Mahan and are used under a Creative Commons license. Check out his site at tinwhistler.com. Wild Old Times is recorded at Farset Labs in Belfast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider giving it a review wherever you find it. It really does help us out. And if you really enjoyed it, tell your friends. Either way, I hope you come back for another wild old time from Irish history.